After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked,
"Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him."
When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born.
"In Bethlehem, in Judea,"
they replied,
"for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel."
Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said,
"Go and make a careful search for the child. And as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him."
After they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route.
As I mentioned earlier, today is Epiphany Sunday, which marks in church tradition the time when the wise men came to give their worship to Jesus. Christians in the Middle Ages were basically illiterate, and so the church often used feast days and such as a way to teach certain biblical truths, and so there was a lot of Bible teaching that went on in these special days. I read this past week that the average peasant or serf during the Middle Ages got 100 days off because of these church feasts. The church was actually doing a service to its people by not allowing them to be overworked by having all of these feast days. So the Magi. What do we know about the Magi? Basically, we know hardly anything at all. And what we think we know is part of church tradition. Like there weren't three wise men. Well, there could have been. We don't know that. It's generally assumed, like the picture that you see on the screen, that there were three because of the three gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gary Larson in The Far Side says there was a fourth wise man, but he was turned away because he brought fruitcake. I don't know whether that's true or not. In the Eastern church tradition, there were 12 wise men, and they are named for us. So we don't know that. We also don't know that they were kings. You know, we sometimes sing the Christmas carol, "We three kings of Orient are." Well, they became kings somewhere in the 3rd or the 4th century in church tradition, but they wouldn't have been kings. We do know that they gave expensive gifts, so at least they were well-to-do. What we do know is that they were Magi. The word Magi is from the Persian that means advisor. We get the word magician from the word Magi. The Magi were kingly advisors that looked to the stars as well as other things to try to deem what's going to happen, omens for the future. The most well-known of those in the Bible was Daniel. King Nebuchadnezzar appointed him, Daniel, chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Remember that in the Daniel story, he was made the primary. He would have been considered a Magi. The Magi in Matthew's story were searching the heavens because that's what they do. And when they saw an unusual star, they attached it to an omen because that's what they do. Now, we don't know how they attached it to the significance of the birth of the King of the Jews. Maybe that's what God does. But then they came and reported to King Herod because that's what Magi's do. They report to the king, and he immediately became disturbed that there was going to be another king of the Jews, because that's what kings do. They take the word of their advisors, the Magi, very seriously. The Magi weren't at the stable, at the manger, as is depicted in scenes, the nativity scenes that we often see. But you can't take those too seriously anyway, because I once saw Santa depicted kneeling before the manger. In fact, once I saw Elvis kneeling before the manger in somebody's nativity scenes. We know that Herod asked when they first saw the star indicating the birth, and then when he decided to kill all the possible children that could be the Messiah, he killed babies 2 years and younger. So there was a time. If these Magi were from Persia, as normally assumed, they would have traveled maybe up to 1,000 miles to get there. So it would have taken them many months, if not years. The real question in this story is, why would God invite pagan stargazers to witness the birth of Jesus? We can kind of understand why he invited the shepherds. In Luke's version of the story, shepherds were on the fringe of society. They were considered dirty and not very honest. You kind of hid your silver and your daughters when shepherds showed up. And so that makes sense, because Jesus was going to spend his ministry talking with, teaching, and spending time with people on the fringes of the culture. But why invite these pagan stargazers? After all, the Bible in the Old Testament has quite a bit to say about witchcraft and magic and astrology and that sorts of things. So why was it that God included these guys in the story of the birth of Jesus? Well, the promise to Abraham that through his seed all nations would be blessed. The call to Israel in the Old Testament was to be a light to the nations. And the word nations in the Old Testament is the same word as Gentiles. That Jesus was to be the Messiah to bless the Gentiles as well as the Jews. So to emphasize that, they are included here, not just on the fringe Jews, but also pagan Gentile astrologers that are invited into the story of God. It is as if in this story, in Bethlehem, the point of the Bible begins to reveal itself. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. There he mentions two things: to redeem those under the law, the Jews, and to receive the adoption to sonship, the Gentiles that are brought over. Jesus is the Savior of Jews and Gentiles. There was a survey that was done some time ago by Pew Research among those who self-identified as evangelical, generally considered to be conservative Christians, although that term has become as much a political term these days. And they were asked about, can people come to God in any other way other than Jesus? Can people be saved in any way other than through Christianity? And half, actually 52%, of people responding to that survey said that yes, you can come to God through any world religion, that Buddha or Hinduism or Hare Krishna or whatever other, are just different roads to come to God. That means that half of Christians in this survey think that the Magi wasted their time. They could have stayed at home in their easy chairs and just been happy pagans and been just as safe as if making this long trip to find Jesus. We live today in a very multicultural, pluralistic, religiously diverse world, but that's the world into which Christianity was born in the first century. Rome accepted not only many gods, they accepted almost any god. When they conquered a people, the Romans adopted their gods and brought them into the Roman pantheon. You were allowed to worship any god that you wanted to. Christians never got into trouble because they said Jesus is Lord. They got into trouble with the Roman Empire because they said only Jesus was Lord. They were considered atheists because they denied that Zeus and Jupiter and all those guys were truly gods. When the Roman Empire decided that Caesar was really a god and required everyone to offer a pinch of incense and say, Caesar is Lord, Christians refused to do that. Their claim was that only Jesus is Lord. And that's what caused them to run into some trouble. The message that was proclaimed from the very beginning is that God has made this Jesus whom you crucified both Lord and Christ. There's no other God except God. There is no way to come to that God except through his Son, Christ, who was indeed the Word incarnate. God became flesh, who came to live among us. Jesus said in John 14 and verse 6, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He said, I am the way, not one way among many. The word that is used there is the word for road. There's only one road that leads to God, and Christ is the way and the one and only road, that he is the truth. Now, there are many things that are true. It's true that the sun came up this morning. It's true that Washington again missed the playoffs. There's all kinds of things that are true, but there is only one ultimate truth. And there is only one truth that leads to God, and that is Jesus Christ. There is only one life to be found, the life that Jesus came to give, and to give it that we might have it more abundantly. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Is it arrogant for Christians to proclaim to be the only way to God? We don't claim to be the only ones that are right, because a lot of us are mistaken by a lot of different things. That's why there are so many churches and so many disagreements. But at the center of our faith is Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. Anyone that gets to the Father is going to be there because Jesus allows them to come there. Is it arrogant for Jesus to claim to be that only way? Well, it sort of depends on what you mean. It would be arrogant if I claimed that. It would be arrogant if you claim that. But Jesus was, in our understanding, not just a prophet. He was God in the flesh. He has the authority. In fact, while Jesus was here, he claimed a lot of God's prerogatives. He claimed God's identity. He said, I and the Father are one. And he said that to a group of Pharisees who immediately reached down and grabbed rocks, getting ready to stone him. And he said, which of my good works are you stoning me for? And they said, we're not stoning you for your good works. We're stoning you because you, a man, claim to be God. That was the claim that Jesus made. Anyone that has seen me, he told his disciples, has already seen the Father. He claimed identity with God. He also claimed God's eternal nature, and I think also his eternal name. In one conflict with the Pharisees, Jesus said to them, very truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am. Remember the name of God in the Old Testament, I am that I am. Tell them I am Yahweh has sent you. Jesus claims that for himself, claims God's preexistence before Abraham came to be. That's literally how that should be translated. I am. I exist. He claimed God's prerogative. I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. Who can forgive sins except God? Exactly the point. And finally, he claimed the right to God's judgment. He said, the Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. So the one that ultimately that is going to judge the world is going to be the Son. But only God can judge. That's exactly the point. So when Jesus claims to be the way, the truth, and the life, he's claiming it from a position of authority. He is God in the flesh. And when God became flesh to dwell among us, he invited these pagan stargazers. And they come from afar to seek after him. And that's really the point of this story, not how many there were or where exactly they came from or whether they were royalty or not or whether they were even at the manger or not. The point is they came from far away because they saw what they saw interpreted in the sky as being a sign of the birth of the King of Kings. And they came, Matthew says, they came so they might worship him. They saw the star and they came. They were wise men, but they didn't come thinking that they knew everything. They came to see. Remember when Nathanael told Peter, "Come, we found the Lord." He said, "Come and see." We are called to come and see, like the wise men bowed down before the Christ. Most of us are here today because we accept that identity of Jesus. We believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. But you see, the wise men altered their entire lives to travel across the ancient Near East to come bow and worship before the one that they believed was the new king. Are we going to alter our lives? Are we going to bow down our lives as we recognize that this one that we worship, this one that we serve, this one whose name we wear, he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings? Wise men and women still seek him today. The question is, will you and I do that? Well, we learned one thing this morning, if nothing else, and that is I can preach a shorter sermon. That's my presentation, and we now are going to be open for our children to share with us the story of Jesus from Luke's gospel.